Hello everybody, this is Brooks Lindsay, the founder and editor of debatepedia.org, and we are going to go over today the open primaries article that we have that is an excellent resource on open primaries. Obviously, the question being, are open primaries a good idea? Open primaries are a system in which anybody can, in the primary election process, which happens before the general election, usually like 6 months or so before the general election. In the primary election, anybody can vote for any of the party potential nominees, any of the candidates, and try to nominate them for that party. So, a Republican could, or an independent could, vote in the Democratic nomination process and nominate a Democratic nominee that would then go on, and the top two would go on to compete in the general election. So some of the pros and cons of this: open primaries favor voter wishes over party establishments. So maybe the party establishment wants a certain candidate, and so they vote for that, candidate, and the activists in the party, the core of the party, want that one particular candidate. But in general, the broader populace wants a different kind of candidate. And so the open primary process tends to favor a broader swath of potential constituents and voters, and enables them to select that potential nominee. But open primaries allow nominations inconsistent with party member views, as you might suspect from what I just said. So if an independent's coming in and voting for that Democratic Party nominee, then that nominee might ultimately be not as reflective of the core values of the Democratic Party as they could be. Open primaries reduce distinctive ideological choices. So one of the things that happens in this process, in the open primary process, is there's a certain moderation, because these candidates are having to appeal to a much broader base, not just their Democratic core. So as a result, the two candidates that move on to the general election might be more similar than significantly different. And this could be bad in that it is just not as distinctive of a choice for voters. Open primaries push third parties out of the general and thus reduce choice, is what some say. So this is that they are harder for third party, Green Party independents to advance through to the general election, because everybody's voting in these primaries. So it's harder for these independent minority parties to advance a candidate to the general election. So you're really just not going to see as many of these third-party candidates. In a closed party system, the nominee from the Green Party or whatever will go on to the general election. It's just they'll usually lose, but at least they'll be on the ballot in the general election, the argument goes. Open primaries advance the two most favored candidates, though, this is on the pro side, to the general election. So instead of having someone like a Republican in a mostly Democratic state that only is getting about 10% of the vote advancing to the general election, where they just don't have a chance of winning, you have two candidates that are the most favored and therefore the most competitive against each other. You have a good competition in the general election, and the elections aren't decided in the primary process. So open primaries produce competitive substantive general elections. Open primaries are similar to how local leaders are elected. How this works, let's say, for a school board or a city council or a county boards of supervisors, is there's actually no party affiliation involved next to that candidate's name. It's based solely on their ideas, their platform, and this kind of a thing. So this could be a good thing, because they are simply relying on you assessing what they might do to advance society, schools, these kinds of things. It's not just their ideological association with you. Open primaries foster nuance and choice within a party. So when you have a competition within a party in the open primary process, let's say in the general election level, if you're advancing two candidates that are both Democrats, is a good competition between those two candidates that produces new and nuanced ideas inside of that party, which can be beneficial to that party because it just makes it more dynamic. Voter participation. Do open primaries improve voter participation? Primaries can decide elections, so they need to be inclusive and open, is one of the arguments in favor of it. So primaries are extremely significant in terms of sometimes deciding the outcome of election, especially in a state that's dominated by one party or another. So let's take California, certain districts, certain counties, almost always, let's say a Democrat will win. It is totally insignificant whether or not a Republican wins their primary, because ultimately the Democrat that wins their primary is most likely going to win. So the primaries are very important in determining the real outcome. Just in, let's say, a tournament where you have two heavyweights against each other in the semifinals, and then two lightweights on the other side of the bracket, sometimes people will call that semifinal match between the heavyweights the actual final. So in some of these counties, the primary between one party might just be the final. Open primary, and this isn't a closed system, but an open system opens it up more so that you might have two Democrats advancing, and so that the general is actually the final. The general election is actually the final. Open primaries let independents, third-party voters, participate. So again, if you're an independent and your candidates are never ever getting elected, what an open primary does is allow you to actually nominate a candidate from a different party so that you could have a voice in advancing that candidate to the general election. Open primaries increase independents' participation in general elections. So by increasing their power, their vote, you will actually incentivize them to participate more. Independent voter base is large, growing, favors open primaries. So 40% of American electorate is now independents. This is in 2010. So shouldn't we be considering that heavily in how we want to engage them in the electorate? Open primaries might do so. Open primaries demand more from voters in assessing candidates. So if we're not just giving them the easy out of, oh, he's a Democrat, I'll vote for him, if we're making it so that voters have to really assess the ideas of different candidates, we are forcing them to engage themselves more. That might be a good thing.